The diner sat just off the highway, quiet except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator behind the counter and the occasional clink of silverware. It was one of those places people stopped at when they were too tired to keep driving or too worn down to care where they ate. The booths were cracked from years of use, and the smell of coffee seemed soaked into the walls. The waitress had been working since early morning. Her feet ached, and her apron was already stained with coffee and grease. Tips had been slow that day. The lunch rush never really came, and most customers ordered the cheapest thing on the menu. She kept smiling anyway. She always did. Around mid-afternoon, when the sun slanted through the front windows just right, the door opened again. A woman stepped inside, hesitating for a moment, as if unsure whether she should stay. She looked tired in a way that sleep could not fix. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, and she held her purse close to her side. The waitress noticed her right away. Years of serving had trained her to read people without meaning to. This woman was not here for comfort food or a quick stop. There was something heavy about her, something careful in the way she walked out. She chose a booth near the window and sat down slowly. She didn't look at the menu at first. Instead, she stared out at the parking lot, blinking as if holding something back. The waitress approached with a glass of water and a small smile. She spoke gently, asking if the woman needed a few minutes. The woman nodded, her voice quiet when she answered. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them on the table. When the waitress returned later, the woman ordered the cheapest meal available. No extras, no drink besides water. Her voice carried a soft apology, as if she felt bad for even ordering that much dot as the food cooked. The waitress passed by the booth a few times. Each time, she noticed small details. The woman's shoes were worn thin. The sleeve of her jacket was frayed at the edge. On the table sat a folded card, barely peeking out from under her purse. It wasn't a credit card. It was thicker, official-looking. The food was placed down, and the woman thanked her more than once. She ate slowly, carefully, like someone trying to make the moment last. When she finished, she sat there for a while longer, staring at the empty plate. Finally, she reached into her purse. The waitress was at the counter when she noticed it. The woman pulled out a handful of coins and a few crumpled bills. She spread them on the table and counted once, then again. Her lips pressed together. She counted a third time. The waitress could see the change in her face from across the room. The woman's shoulders sank, and her eyes filled with something sharp and painful. She glanced toward the counter, then quickly looked away. When the waitress walked over with the bill, the woman didn't touch it right away. She just stared at the small piece of paper like it had insulted her. "I'm short," the woman finally said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "I thought I had enough." The waitress glanced at the amount. It wasn't much. $20 short. The kind of money some people dropped without noticing. The kind of money others felt in their bones. The woman pushed the money she had toward the edge of the table. Her hands shook more now. "I can leave my phone," she said quickly, "or come back tomorrow. I promise I will." Her eyes were glassy, not dramatic, just tired, like she had reached the end of something already too long. The waitress felt a tight pull in her chest. She had seen this before. People choosing between pride and hunger, between asking for help and pretending they were fine. Without thinking too hard about it, she picked up the small black book holding the bill. "You're okay," she said softly. "It's taken care of." The woman blinked. "No, I don't think you heard me. I don't have enough." "I heard you," the waitress replied. "Don't worry about it." The woman stared at her, confused. "I can't let you do that." The waitress shrugged in a way that made it seem small, even though it wasn't. "I've got it." She pulled a folded bill from her apron pocket. It was most of what she'd made that day. She slid it into the book and tucked it under her arm. For a moment, the woman didn't speak. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. Tears welled up fast, catching her by surprise. "I didn't come here expecting help," she said quietly. "I just needed to sit somewhere." The waitress nodded. "Sometimes that's enough." The woman wiped her eyes quickly, embarrassed. "My husband served," she said, almost as if explaining herself. "He's not home right now." She reached into her purse and pulled out the folded card. A military ID. The edges were worn, like it had been handled too many times. She held it for a second, then tucked it back away. "It's been a long day," she added. The waitress didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. She simply placed a hand on the table for a brief moment. Not long enough to be awkward. Just long enough to be human. When the woman stood to leave, she paused. "I don't know how to thank you." The waitress smiled again. "You don't have to." The woman nodded, holding her purse close, and walked toward the door. Before stepping outside, she turned back once, her eyes meeting the waitress's across the room. There was something there. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Like she had just been reminded that kindness still existed. The door closed behind her. The waitress returned to wiping down tables, her thoughts already moving on to the next task. She didn't tell her coworkers. She didn't expect anything back. It was just $20. Just a moment. Outside, the woman stood in the parking lot for a long time before getting into her car. She sat behind the wheel, gripping it tightly, breathing through the wave of emotion that finally broke free. She looked back at the diner once more before starting the engine. Neither of them knew that what had just happened was only the beginning. Not even 15 minutes later, the quiet afternoon would be shattered in a way no one inside that diner could have imagined. But for now, the diner remained still, unaware that a simple act of kindness had already set something much bigger into motion. The waitress went back to her routine, like nothing special had happened. She wiped down the counter, refilled the sugar jars, and poured herself a quick sip of coffee when no one was looking. Her feet still hurt, and the clock on the wall still moved too slowly. Life inside the diner stayed the same, yet something about the moment lingered with her. She kept thinking about the way the woman's hands shook when she counted her money, the look in her eyes when she realized she was short. It wasn't just about food. It was about dignity, about being worn down by too many hard days stacked together. The waitress pushed the thought aside and focused on her work. There were dishes to wash, tables to clean. A couple of truck drivers came in and ordered burgers. She smiled, took their order, and carried on. Outside, the woman sat in her car with both hands on the steering wheel. She didn't drive away right away. The engine was off, and the car was quiet except for her breathing. Once the tears started, they didn't stop easily. She rested her forehead against the wheel and let herself cry. Not loudly, just enough to release everything she'd been holding in all day. The phone buzzed in her purse, but she ignored it at first. She needed a minute. Her mind replayed the day from the beginning. The early morning call, the long wait, the paperwork that led nowhere, the quiet fear she tried not to show anyone. She had promised herself she would stay strong, but strength gets heavy when carried alone. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. For a moment, she hesitated. She didn't want to worry anyone. She didn't want to sound weak. But then she thought about the diner, about the waitress, about the way kindness had shown up without asking for anything back. She made the call. The line rang twice before someone picked up. She didn't say much at first, just that she was okay, that she had needed a break, that someone had helped her when she least expected it. There was a pause on the other end. She explained what happened, her voice quiet but steady now. She told the story simply. A small diner, a short bill, a waitress who didn't hesitate. She mentioned the $20 and laughed softly through her tears. Almost embarrassed by how much it meant, the person listening didn't interrupt. When she finished, she leaned back in the seat and stared at the diner again. It looked ordinary. Faded sign, cracked pavement. Nothing special at first glance, but she knew better. After the call ended, she sat there a bit longer, letting the calm settle in. She wiped her face, checked the mirror, and took a deep breath. She felt lighter, not because her problems were gone, but because someone had seen her and cared. She started the engine and slowly pulled out of the parking lot, back inside. The waitress noticed the afternoon light had shifted. Shadows stretched across the floor, and the air felt different somehow. She shook the feeling off and focused on taking another order. One of her coworkers asked how her tips were going. She shrugged and said it was a slow day. She didn't mention the $20. It wasn't something she needed praise for. It just felt right. Still, every now and then, her eyes drifted to the front window. She wasn't sure why. Time passed. Plates were cleared. Coffee was poured. The diner stayed calm. No one inside had any idea that a quiet phone call had already set something in motion far beyond those walls. Miles away, conversations were happening. Not rushed, not loud, but serious, respectful. Words like gratitude and character were used. The story of a small kindness traveled faster than the waitress could imagine. Back at the diner, the waitress finally took a short break. She sat in a booth near the back, rubbing her sore feet and sipping water. Her thoughts wandered back to the woman again. She hoped she was okay. She hoped she made it home safe. She didn't expect anything else. Outside, traffic on the highway moved steadily. Cars passed, then trucks, the kind that rumbled deep and low. At first, no one noticed. The sound blended into the usual noise of the road. A few minutes later, the sound came again. Louder this time. Heavier. One of the customers glanced out the window, curious. Another followed. The waitress didn't look yet. She was busy clearing a table. The ground seemed to vibrate slightly, just enough to be felt. Someone near the counter mentioned hearing engines. Another joked about a parade or construction nearby. No one was worried, just curious. The waitress picked up a stack of plates and finally turned toward the front of the diner. Through the glass, she saw movement in the distance. Large shapes slowing down, turning signals flashing in unison. Vehicles pulling off the highway. Her brow furrowed. This wasn't normal traffic. She set the plates down carefully and walked closer to the window. Other people stood beside her now. Conversations faded into quiet murmurs. More vehicles appeared, one after another. Neatly spaced, purposeful. The parking lot began to fill. Someone whispered, "Is that military?" The waitress felt a strange chill move through her. She didn't understand why. She hadn't done anything wrong. But her heart began to beat faster anyway. Uniformed figures stepped out, moving with calm confidence. Not rushed, not aggressive, just organized. The diner door hadn't opened yet. Inside, silence settled in, thick and heavy. Forks paused mid-air. Coffee cups hovered inches above tables. The waitress stood frozen near the window, her mind racing through every possibility. She had no idea that the woman she helped less than an hour ago was connected to what was unfolding outside. She only knew that something unexpected was about to happen, and whatever it was heading straight for her. The diner, once quiet and unnoticed, had become the center of something far bigger than any of them realized, and the door was about to open. The rumble outside grew louder. The waitress felt it in her chest, low and steady, like distant thunder rolling closer. Her hands gripped the edge of the counter as she watched, frozen, as more vehicles turned into the diner's lot. They were military trucks, bigger than anything she had ever seen in one place. Uniformed soldiers stepped down from each vehicle, moving with quiet precision. There was no chaos, no shouting, just a calm determination that made everyone inside stop talking. Customers who had been talking quietly moments ago now pressed against the windows, whispering to each other. Cameras from phones appeared in hands, but even the curiosity of strangers couldn't shake the tense calm. Everyone instinctively felt that this wasn't a show, a coincidence, or an accident. Something was happening, and they were about to witness it. The waitress stepped back, her mind spinning. Questions raced through her. Why here? Why now? And somehow, without understanding why, she felt a small knot of worry tighten in her stomach. The lead officer moved ahead of the others, his posture straight and confident. He walked to the diner door and paused, surveying the small space inside. There was a moment when time seemed to stretch, when the ordinary became extraordinary. The waitress could feel it, the stillness, the anticipation. The entire diner seemed to hold its breath. She watched as he raised his hand and opened the door. The bell above it jingled softly, breaking the silence in a sound that felt almost fragile against the gravity of the moment outside. Heads turned, eyes widening. Phones went down as people took in what was happening. The officer stepped in slowly, scanning the room. His gaze was calm but sharp, and it landed on the waitress almost immediately. She felt a chill run through her, but not fear. More like surprise, like someone had just recognized a small part of herself she hadn't expected to matter to anyone. He didn't rush. He didn't smile at first. He simply nodded to her, a small acknowledgement that carried weight. Then he spoke, and the voice, though quiet, filled the room in a way that made every word matter. "Are you the one who helped the woman in the corner booth today?" He asked, not accusatory, not casual, just direct. Everyone else in the diner went silent. Even the chatter of the truck drivers faded. All attention focused on the waitress, who could feel every eye on her. She swallowed, unsure what to say. She didn't expect recognition. She didn't expect gratitude. She only did what felt right. "Yes," she said softly. I helped her." The officer nodded again, a small but firm gesture. "That was kind of you. It may have seemed small, but it mattered more than you know." The words hit her in a way that surprised her. She had spent years serving people in small ways, usually unnoticed. She had washed dishes, poured coffee, smiled through long shifts, and rarely thought anyone noticed or cared. And now, standing in a diner she barely thought of as special, a man in uniform thanked her for simply doing what she thought was right. "Your kindness did not go unnoticed," he continued. "She called us. She wanted us to know. And we came as soon as we could." The waitress blinked. She hadn't realized the woman had told anyone, let alone called her husband or commanding officers. The thought made her feel suddenly exposed, though not in a bad way. It was just the weight of realizing that one small moment had traveled further than she imagined. The officer motioned toward the back of the diner, and a few soldiers followed him inside, standing in quiet rows. Their movements were respectful, careful, like they understood the room they had entered. They weren't here to intimidate, to demand, or to command. They were here to honor something ordinary, something human. A murmur ran through the diner, low and respectful. The customers, who had moments ago been worried or curious, now felt a strange kind of awe. No one spoke over the soldiers. No one interrupted the moment. Even the coffee machine's hum seemed to fade into the background. It was as if the room had been reshaped around gratitude. The officer took a step closer to the waitress. "I want you to understand," he said, his voice calm but firm. "In our world, it's easy to forget small acts of kindness. But they are the things that keep people like us human. You reminded someone of that today." The waitress felt warmth rise to her cheeks. She had never thought of herself as brave or heroic. She was just a waitress, doing her job, helping when she could. And yet here, she felt a weighty sense of pride. Not the kind that makes someone boast, but the kind that quietly settles into your chest and makes you feel seen. The woman's husband, or rather, the husband connected to the call, wasn't here physically yet, but his presence was felt through the discipline and respect of the soldiers. It was as if their careful, silent actions carried his gratitude in waves across the diner. The officer motioned to the group again. One soldier stepped forward, holding a small, folded card. The gesture was simple, quiet, and intentional. He handed it to the waitress. She took it carefully, unfolding it to reveal a short, handwritten note. She recognized the handwriting instantly, the woman's. The note read something simple, heartfelt and human, a thank you that felt like it had traveled across miles. Through worry and fear, to reach her. Tears welled in her eyes. She blinked rapidly, trying to focus, trying to steady herself, but her hands shook, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. She had helped someone in a small, ordinary way, and now, through an unexpected chain of events, she was standing at the center of a silent expression of gratitude she couldn't have imagined. The officer noticed. He nodded once quietly. "You see? You've made a difference," he said. "Sometimes it takes more than medals, more than recognition. Sometimes it's this simple human thing." The waitress wanted to speak, to say something, but words failed her. She just held the note, and the weight of its meaning settled in her chest like a small, warm stone. The other soldiers stood quietly behind the officer, some watching her, some looking around the diner with respect. No one was loud. No one was demanding attention. They didn't need to. The moment itself was loud enough. The quiet acknowledgement, the presence, the respect, it carried a message louder than words ever could. Outside, more vehicles remained parked, the convoy still ready to move. But inside, the world had shrunk to the diner, to a few dozen square feet, to the small human story that had brought strangers together in an unspoken way. It was a story about kindness, about noticing, about caring when it would have been easier to walk past. It was a story about humanity. The waitress folded the note carefully and tucked it into her apron. She didn't want to lose it. It felt like a secret treasure, a reminder that her small actions mattered. She glanced at the officer again. I didn't think it was a big deal," she said quietly. He smiled, a rare human smile. "It is to her. And now it is to all of us." He gestured to the soldiers, standing respectfully behind him. "This is how gratitude travels. Quietly, without fanfare. You made it possible." Her hands stopped shaking. Her chest felt lighter. The diner's usual hum, the sound of dishes clattering, of coffee brewing returned, but it no longer felt ordinary. It felt like the world had paused just long enough to show her that small acts can ripple far beyond sight. The customers began to whisper, some smiling, some wiping tears they didn't realize had fallen. The waitress didn't look at them. She only looked at the soldiers, at the officer, at the note that had made the journey from worry and fear to hope and appreciation. She felt something she rarely allowed herself to feel, hope. That in a world so full of ordinary struggles, ordinary people could do extraordinary things quietly, without needing attention. The officer turned to leave, signaling the soldiers to follow. But before stepping out, he gave her one last nod, one final acknowledgement. It was small. It was simple. And yet it carried the weight of something she would never forget. As the door closed behind them, the diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Customers whispered to each other, unsure if they had witnessed something real or a fleeting moment of wonder. The waitress leaned against the counter, taking a deep breath. Her apron was warm against her skin. Her feet ached as usual, but her heart felt different. Heavier, yes, but in a way that felt full, like it had been touched by something bigger than herself. She didn't yet know the woman's husband had also been notified directly. She didn't know how far the story would travel, who else would hear it, or what impact it might have beyond that diner on that quiet afternoon. All she knew was that one small act of kindness, just helping someone cover a $20 shortfall, had grown into something remarkable, unplanned and unforgettable. And as she looked out the window, catching a glimpse of the convoy moving slowly down the highway, she realized that the world, sometimes, could be a place where gratitude found its way back to you when you least expected it. The ordinary had become extraordinary, and she had been at the center of it. Just by being human, the diner had returned to its quiet rhythm, though the air still felt charged with the memory of what had just happened. The waitress moved slowly between tables, clearing dishes, refilling coffee cups, and wiping down the counters. Her mind kept drifting back to the note she had tucked into her apron. It felt like a small treasure, a reminder that her small, ordinary action had rippled into something much bigger than she could have imagined. Outside, the convoy had returned to the road, engines rumbling low, organized, and precise. They were heading somewhere, moving as a single unit, carrying with them the message of gratitude that had started in that small diner. The waitress didn't know where they were going, or why, or how far their reach would extend. She only knew she had been part of something she didn't fully understand yet, and the feeling stayed with her like a quiet warmth in her chest. A few minutes later, the diner door opened again. This time, it wasn't the soldiers. It was the woman. She stepped inside slowly, eyes bright with unshed tears, but her expression was calm, steady, and almost relieved. The waitress noticed immediately how different she looked now compared to earlier in the afternoon. There had been weight in her shoulders before, a heaviness that made her seem smaller, almost fragile. Now, there was a light in her stance, as though the burden had lifted slightly. The woman came to the counter, placing her hands gently on the polished wood. She spoke softly, almost as if afraid to break the delicate stillness that had settled in the diner. "I wanted to thank you again," she said. "I didn't know how to. I didn't know what else to do. But I wanted you to know that you made a real difference today." The waitress nodded, her own voice catching in her throat for a moment. "It was nothing," she said. I just wanted to help." The woman shook her head, smiling faintly. "It wasn't nothing. Not to me, not to my husband, and not to everyone else who found out about it." Her eyes flicked toward the window, as if she could see the soldiers moving down the highway, even from inside. "He told me to make sure you knew how much he appreciated it. He said it reminded him of why he serves. Because people like you exist. People who care, even in small ways." The waitress blinked, feeling her chest tighten. It was rare for anyone to speak with such honesty, such heartfelt sincerity. She had spent years helping people, but she had never experienced gratitude like this. It was intimate, genuine, and it carried weight. Not the kind of weight that pressures or burdens, but the kind that lifts and fills. The woman leaned slightly on the counter, her hands clasped together. "You probably don't understand how much courage it takes to be here today, to offer kindness without expecting anything in return. But my husband does. And so do I. We wanted you to know that you mattered. You still matter." The waitress shook her head softly, unsure what to say. She had grown used to small acts of service being unnoticed. She had learned not to expect anything in return. And yet, here was someone who had been struggling, someone connected to the military, someone who had seen the smallest detail of her life and recognized it, telling her that it had mattered, that it had mattered more than she ever imagined. The woman continued, her voice calm but firm, steady in its sincerity. When I left earlier, I was exhausted. I didn't think anyone cared enough to notice the little struggles. I didn't think anyone would stop and help without hesitation. But you did. And it changed something for me. It gave me hope. Not just for today, but for tomorrow too. The waitress felt tears prick the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had always tried to be strong for others, to carry herself with calm and composure. She wasn't used to having someone see her so clearly, to recognize the impact of something so simple, so ordinary, yet so human. The woman reached into her purse and pulled out a small envelope, handing it to the waitress. "This is from all of us," she said softly. "From my husband, from his unit, from everyone who knows what you did. It's just a small token. Something to remember that even the smallest kindness can travel further than you realize." The waitress accepted the envelope carefully, feeling the weight of it in her hands. She opened it slowly, revealing a folded letter, neatly written, and inside, a small card signed by several soldiers. Each word was simple, honest, and direct. They thanked her for noticing, for acting without hesitation, for reminding them that humanity could still be found in everyday moments. Each signature carried a weight that made her feel both humble and proud at the same time. She looked up at the woman, who watched her with gentle patience. I don't know what to say," the waitress admitted. "I didn't do it for this. I didn't do it for recognition. I did to help." The woman smiled softly. "And that's why it matters. Because it was real. Because it was you. And because someone needed to know that people like you exist. That kindness exists, even when the world feels heavy." The diner stayed quiet around them, the hum of conversation returning slowly, softly, like waves settling on a shore after a storm. The customers had gone back to their meals, to their own lives, but the energy in the room had shifted. It wasn't just the letters or the note. It was the sense of connection, of humanity that lingered. Everyone who had witnessed even a part of the interaction could feel it, even if only subconsciously. The woman stayed for a few minutes longer, sharing small stories about her husband, about the long days of service, about the challenges and fears that came with loving someone in uniform. She didn't speak dramatically. She didn't embellish. She simply spoke honestly, with sincerity, in a way that reminded the waitress that life was made up of ordinary moments, and that those moments could carry extraordinary meaning when noticed. The waitress listened, occasionally nodding, occasionally offering a small word of encouragement or understanding. She had served hundreds of people, but few had ever spoken so openly, so vulnerably about their lives and their fears. And yet, in that quiet afternoon, in that small diner, it felt natural. It felt human. Finally, the woman stood to leave again. She looked at the waitress, her eyes shining with gratitude and a quiet intensity that made the waitress feel seen in a way she had rarely experienced. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything. You've reminded us all that humanity is still here. That hope is still here." The waitress nodded, feeling the warmth settle in her chest. She had no words that could match the weight of the gratitude being offered, no response that could fully capture the significance of the moment. All she could do was smile, gently, and hope that her presence, her small act of help, had made a difference beyond what she could imagine. The woman left the diner slowly, her movements calm and deliberate. The waitress watched her go, feeling the quiet echo of the encounter linger in the air. She returned to the counter, to her tasks, to the hum of the diner, but everything felt slightly changed. The space was the same, the tables were the same, and yet the energy had shifted. There was a quiet power in small acts, a quiet beauty in unnoticed kindness, and a quiet joy in being recognized for simply being human. She tucked the letter and the card safely into her apron, a tangible reminder that her actions, no matter how small, could ripple outwards in ways she could never fully see. Outside, the sun had begun its slow descent, painting the sky with colors that seemed to reflect the warmth settling in her heart dot, and as the diner hummed softly around her, she realized something she had never fully understood before, that kindness, no matter how ordinary, carries weight, that it travels further than expected, that it touches hearts in ways that cannot always be measured, but can always be felt. For the first time that day, the waitress allowed herself to sit for a moment, letting the quiet wash over her. The world outside continued moving, trucks driving past, people walking along the highway, life unfolding in its usual pace. But inside the diner, in that quiet, human space, something extraordinary had taken place. A small act of help, unnoticed by most, had grown into a wave of gratitude that would linger far longer than a single afternoon. And she knew, deep in her heart, that it wasn't over, that the ripples would continue, touching more lives than she could count, inspiring more kindness than she could imagine, and reminding everyone, soldiers, families, strangers, herself, that humanity, compassion, and hope are never wasted. They are the quiet forces that move the world forward, one small act at a time. The diner had settled back into its usual rhythm, but the waitress knew it would never feel quite the same again. There was a quiet awareness now, a sense that ordinary actions could ripple far beyond what anyone could see. She moved through the room with a calm, steady rhythm, but her thoughts kept drifting back to the woman, the note, the soldiers, and the quiet, powerful gratitude that had filled the space just hours earlier. The day outside had begun to shift toward evening. Sunlight leaned low across the parking lot, casting long shadows of the diner's sign and the scattered vehicles that remained from the convoy. The waitress stood at the counter for a moment, looking out the window. She imagined the trucks rolling steadily down the highway, the soldiers inside quietly carrying a story of a single act of kindness. She felt a strange pride, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that quietly warms the heart dot. It wasn't long before the woman returned again. She came in slowly, walking with a sense of purpose that made the waitress pause. Her expression was more relaxed now, lighter, almost as if the weight she carried earlier had been eased by the ripple of gratitude she had set in motion. She approached the counter, and the waitress could see it clearly in her eyes, thankfulness. Yes, but also a quiet peace. "I wanted to bring something," the woman said softly, placing a small package on the counter. "It's nothing big, just a way to say thank you again." The waitress raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. She had been given notes, letters, and a card, and each one had touched her deeply. She didn't expect anything more, yet here was the woman. Still thinking of her dot, the waitress reached for the package carefully. It was simple, wrapped neatly in plain brown paper. When she opened it, she found a small handmade journal and a pen. The journal's cover had a soft, warm feel, and inside, the first page carried a short note written in careful, steady handwriting. It read, "For you, so you can write down the kindness you see, the small things that make a difference, and the moments that matter. Because the world needs to remember what you did today, and so do you." The waitress felt warmth rise in her chest. She had never owned something like this that felt so personal, so intentional. It wasn't expensive or flashy. It wasn't meant to be. It was a reminder, tangible and real, that even the smallest gestures could travel far and touch hearts. She looked up at the woman, who was watching her quietly, waiting patiently for a reaction. "I don't know what to say," the waitress admitted. Her voice shook slightly, though she tried to keep it calm. "I didn't do this for anything. I just wanted to help." The woman shook her head, smiling softly. "That's why it matters. Because it came from you. Because it was real. And because sometimes the smallest gestures remind us of the best parts of humanity." She paused for a moment, then added quietly, "My husband said this will be something you can keep with you always. A reminder that even when life feels heavy, kindness matters. Always." The waitress held the journal close for a moment, feeling the paper beneath her fingers and the weight of the gesture. It was more than a gift. It was acknowledgement, respect, and gratitude wrapped into one. She realized that it wasn't about the $20 she had given earlier. It was about showing that someone cared, even when the world seemed too busy or too cold to notice. They spoke for a few minutes longer, quietly, like two people sharing a small, sacred space. The woman told more stories about her husband's service, the challenges of military life, and the quiet struggles that often went unnoticed. She spoke of the pride and fear that came with loving someone in uniform, and the loneliness that followed when distance and duty created invisible walls. The waitress listened, offering understanding and gentle words when needed, realizing that these ordinary moments were, in fact, extraordinary. Before leaving, the woman leaned slightly toward the waitress. "You've inspired more than you know," she said. "Not just me, not just my husband, but everyone who hears about this. People will remember this. They will talk about it. They will act because of it. And that's how small acts grow into something bigger than themselves." The waitress nodded, feeling tears prick the corners of her eyes again. She wasn't used to recognition, but this wasn't about fame or praise. It was about humanity, connection, and the understanding that what she did mattered in a way she could never have imagined. After the woman left, the waitress sat in the booth near the window for a few moments, quietly opening the journal and writing her first entry. She didn't write about herself or her deeds, but about the small details she had noticed throughout the day. The way the woman's hands trembled when she counted her money, the quiet dignity she carried even when exhausted, the small smile that appeared when kindness arrived unexpectedly. Writing it down made her feel like she could hold on to the moment, preserve it, and carry it with her into the future. The diner slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Evening diners arrived. The smell of fresh coffee and warm meals filled the air, and the sounds of conversation returned softly. But the energy in the room had shifted subtly, quietly. There was a sense that the ordinary could become extraordinary with a single act of kindness. The waitress moved through the room with a quiet pride, carrying the journal close to her heart, feeling the impact of the day ripple outward in ways she would only discover over time. That night, after closing the diner and cleaning the counters, the waitress stepped outside. The sky was painted with streaks of pink and orange, the fading sunlight reflecting on the pavement. The air was crisp, carrying the quiet hum of cars driving along the highway. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day settle in her chest in a gentle, warm way. She knew that life would continue, with its challenges and struggles. But the memory of this day and the connection it had created would remain with her forever. She thought about the convoy, the soldiers, the woman, and the small, ordinary act that had started it all. She realized that kindness didn't need to be grand to matter. It didn't need to be noticed by everyone or rewarded with accolades. Sometimes the smallest gestures, the quietest moments, carried the most meaning. And sometimes those gestures returned in ways that exceeded all expectations, traveling farther than the giver could ever imagine. Weeks later, letters began arriving at the diner. Not just notes, but small tokens of appreciation from people who had heard the story. Soldiers wrote about how it reminded them of why they served. Families shared stories of how kindness in small moments had helped them through difficult days. Strangers sent cards simply saying, "Thank you for showing the world that kindness exists." The waitress read each one carefully, holding them in her hands, feeling the quiet power of each word. She didn't respond to all of them. She didn't need to. She simply let the gratitude wash over her, reminding herself that her actions mattered far beyond the moment she thought they ended. Months passed, and the diner returned fully to its routine, though with a subtle change. There was a quiet energy among the staff, a recognition that even the smallest gestures could create extraordinary ripples. Customers, too, seemed more aware, kinder, more thoughtful in ways that couldn't be measured, but could be felt. The waitress continued to write in her journal regularly, noting the small acts of kindness she witnessed or experienced. She wrote about customers who smiled when they were sad, strangers who shared their stories, coworkers who went out of their way to help each other. Each entry reminded her that human connection mattered, that the ordinary could become extraordinary, and that hope could be found in even the smallest corners of the world. One evening, as she closed the diner, she looked out the window at the empty parking lot. The sky was deep blue, the first stars appearing one by one. She felt a quiet sense of peace, knowing that the small act that had begun with a $20 help to a weary woman had grown into something lasting, something bigger than herself, bigger than the diner, bigger than any one person could measure. She smiled softly, holding the journal close. She understood now that kindness, honesty, and humanity could travel far beyond sight, touching lives in ways that would continue long after the moment had passed. And she knew, in that quiet evening light, that the world was a better place because she had simply cared when it mattered. And so the diner remained, ordinary to anyone passing by, yet extraordinary in the hearts of those who knew its story. The waitress continued her work, simple, steady, and human. The impact of a single, selfless act lived on not as fame or recognition, but as hope, gratitude, and the quiet, enduring reminder that humanity could still shine brightly, even in the smallest moments. That night, as the lights dimmed and the door locked, the waitress held the journal to her chest, feeling the ripples of a simple act stretching far beyond the diner walls. She understood fully, finally, that one small decision, one act of care, could change lives in ways she could never have imagined. And it had. The world continued, moving forward with its usual noise, challenges, and chaos. But in that small corner, in that quiet diner, one story of kindness had become a reminder that hope exists. Humanity matters, and even the simplest actions can echo across miles, across hearts, and across lives, leaving a mark that cannot be erased. And with that, the waitress finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that she had done something meaningful, and that meaning would travel on, far beyond anything she could ever see.